David, oh, he's walking on hot coals as Alireza, but are these more than just one?
B5! Get him off the board!
This was a really tense Armageddon final because Dmitrij Kollars was playing out of his skin. He's a 23-year-old German grandmaster. Now he's only 2600, low 2600s. Alireza, of course, is nearly 2800, just completely overpowered at blitz as well. So this should never have been a contest. But it went to Armageddon, and then Alireza was on the black side of it. They did the bids. Alireza bidded lower, so he got to choose which side. He went black. And now if I show you the first couple of moves, look at Alireza's clock. So he's got 8 minutes and a little bit against Dmitrij's 15 minutes, but Alireza only has to draw to take the result, proceed to the next round. This is the Chess Kid Cup, by the way, Division 1. So okay, we get these standard opening moves, Bishop b5, Roy Lopez, and Alireza goes Knight f6. This is the Berlin defense. Obviously got a reputation for being rock solid. Kramnik frustrated the hell out of Kasparov in 2000, really proved the merit of this opening. Now there's different ways to go here. We've seen quite a bit of d3 recently at the top level, and black carries on with bishop c5. You keep more pieces on there. But castles is main line, if you will, and now captures can be played on e4. You know, you give the pawn, and then the line where the queens come off the board, the famous Berlin endgame, that's the one here where you push with pawn d4. But what we see here from Dmitrij is rook e1. So the knight drops back, it hits this undefended bishop, but white doesn't defend the bishop, takes the pawn instead. And because of all the discovery threats, you have to block the e-file, and now you can drop this bishop back. So we see takes on e5, rook recaptures, castles, and d4. And basically, black is very solid with the pawn structure here, completely symmetrical as you can see, but you've got to do something about the development, right? Do something with this knight, push the d-pawn. So Alireza goes knight e8 immediately. You can go rook e8 there as well, by the way. Now we see d5, taking some space, so not letting Alireza go d5 and set up the pawn structure with c6. And now after bishop c5, there's an immediate tactical threat in the air. So to take on f2 with check, after the king recaptures, then go queen f6 check and pick up the loose rook. So bishop e3 guards against that, and now Alireza forgets his theory. The top move here is d6, and you can't start moving this rook backwards or anything like that. You're running into knight f6. So the best way to play is actually taking on c5. Now if you capture the rook, well, you capture here, you know, you're doing great obviously. So black should take here, and now you've also created a square for the knight here. I mean, it's a different way to play. So what Alireza did, taking, not too bad, but he misses his chance to actually just equalize a bit more, and white now has a very pleasant position because knight c3 comes. By the way, not c4 looks really natural, but you kind of immediately kill this bishop. So this is a nicer way to develop. Alireza goes knight f6, queen d4, an amazing centralizing move. You know, look at the difference between the queens because of the pawn structure. And now bishop d7 is followed by this rook doubling and rook e8. So a very, very pleasant position for white. And it only continues from here. We get pawn h3, pawn a6, and pawn a4. Classic space gaining play. Pawn h6 and pawn a5. And it's really hard to liberate this bathtub pawn structure. You know, classic pawn structure. Looks like you're in the bath, right? But what we see from Alireza here is that he does try to strike out in a moment, but is it the best move? Well, it's debatable. He's low on time. They're big decisions. So we get a rook trade first. Rook recaptures, and this is the moment. So the top engine move here is bishop f5. Hold the pawn structure, but okay, still really, really pleasant for white. You know, there's always going to be ideas of swinging across the fourth rank with a heavy piece, pressuring these pawns, etc. So Alireza thinks, right, I'm going to take my moment to liberate the position. We get captures, bishop recaptures, and although this is a weakness, he hopes to get rid of it sometime in the future or trade it, you know, for a counter white pawn, whichever one it might be. However, after b4, there are some problems here because what Dmitrij wants is to just remove this knight, so think e2 and then f4 so as not to be in the way of the bishop, and then go c4, b5 and just steamroll this kind of 3-on-2 through. So this is the plan. Queen d7 from Alireza already starts to fight against that. Good move. Now we get knight e2, rook e8. These ones come off. The knight now spins to f4 and knight c7. So good maneuvering from Alireza to cover those light squares, but I really like now how the play switches between both sides of the board, just oscillating back and forth. So c4 played, this is soon going to be a threat if one of these pieces relinquishes control. And Alireza now seizes the moment to go d5. Best move, great move, he's doing well here. But after knight h5, now we see Dmitrij probing both sides of the board. Now, there's a threat here to checkmate the black king. If you go f6, well, it's playable, but it's just very, very weakening. Swiss cheese on the light squares. Plus white still has the light squared bishop. I can understand why Alireza didn't want to do this. So instead, he goes knight e6, defends g7, hits the queen, but now queen g4. The pressure continues because there's a threat here to go knight f6 check, win the queen, the pawn is pinned, of course. Now, how should Alireza respond to that threat? Well, he has to go king to h8. The queen must stay here and keep an eye on the b5 square. What does Alireza do? Queen e7 covers this threat, but leaves control here, and this is when we get this reaction.
David, he's walking on hot coals as Alireza, but are these more than just one?
B5! Get him off the board!
So Dmitrij steamrolling through with pawn to b5, and you can't just retreat your bishop or simply takes on d5 is the problem. Hits the knight. Where does the knight go? Well, let's say g5, one of the top computer moves, but then there's queen d4, threatening mate again, f6, and then you can even win a second pawn in this particular variation, so really not good. Instead, we see Alireza take. The pawn recaptures, the bishop drops, and a6, just ramming through, pushing through, ramming through, mixing words, that a pawn there, running it down the board. So bishop c6 comes to cover that a8 square, and now here Dmitrij, he just plays slightly hastily. So he pushes his f pawn, really natural, you want to run it down, pick up a tempo on the knight, tempo on the queen, rip open the king. But by doing so, you do open up your own king for checks. So knight g3 was a bit more controlled, spinning to f5 and so on and so forth. But f4, it is dangerous in blitz. Now Alireza checks, best move, we get king h2, but Alireza just doesn't find the most precise moves here. So for example, queen e3, best move by miles, because you stop white from coming to g3, well, unless you're going to trade queens or something, or maybe d4 can come, because black does have their own trump of a passed pawn here, of course, and this one isn't going anywhere just yet. But what we see in the game is queen d4. It allows queen g3, covering the dark squares. Now here Alireza goes queen to a1. This was his idea. So he does hit the bishop, and he stays on this crucial diagonal, covering mate, especially if this knight ever moves. And after bishop d3, that's exactly what we see. The knight move, spinning into c5, hitting this bishop. Now it's a real crunch moment for Dmitrij. Where do you go with it? Do you drop back here, stay with the pawn? But then there's counterplay coming with queen b2. There's also knight e4, which is kind of nasty. It's getting a bit messy. And equally, do you drop back to c2, abandon the pawn, but try and go for play down here, boxing in the king? Maybe soon you go f5 and open the queen to check. That's another way the computer says to play that is okay. Well, what Dmitrij does is pawn f5. Really logical idea, just keep attacking. But after captures, queen recaptures, now Alireza has this chance to check. But yes, the board has just gone grey. This is an analysis variation. Alireza didn't play what's really the most obvious move on the board. I guess it was something he didn't see, right? Obviously, he's a phenomenal player, just not in his form in this game. Now, king g1 could come, but then queen e1 check. The king can come back, check. And if you block with the queen, well, then you can even go f6. Defending like this, and there's no mate because this queen is pinned to the king. The bishop's covering here. You've got your own passed pawn. The computer just gives this as roughly level, basically. But Alireza goes king to f8. Not a good move, because now queen g3 comes, and there are huge problems. There's pressure here, there's pressure here. The pawn's still dangerous. Now Alireza captures the pawn. What if he doesn't do that? What was the variation I was looking at? Oh yeah, what if he just tries to stay with protecting the king? Well, you can't go d4. You block your own queen to protect. You can't go f6, same problem. You know, you can shuffle this bishop, but say you shuffle the king, you know, one of the top computer moves actually, well then a7 can come. Say the king comes back to f8, well then you start invading with check. The king goes, and pawn f6 is really nasty. And even if the king kind of shuffled between these squares here, there's similar problems basically. You smash open the position, you can start checking, and because the queen and knight are such a powerful combination, well, you're actually either checkmating the king or promoting the pawn. Huge problems, right? So coming back here, we didn't see the king shuffle, we saw the pawn picked up, but now pawn f6, just devastatingly opening the position. Now g5 was played basically so that now the king can find some luft on g6 in some lines where it runs away. That's why not g6. But still, we get this queen d6 check. Now, of course, you can't come this way or you get mated in one. So the king comes down here. We see check, the king goes. Now we see a small repetition of check, king back, check, king here, but now queen f8, just shutting this trap. You're about to checkmate, so the king runs up the board, and now the knight hops back, saving itself and also covering these squares. Again, mate in one threatened, so the pawn is taken, but now check. The king has to run back, and here the knight shows its deadly power in combination with the queen. Why does it come to f5? Well, from f5, not only do you pressure these squares, but you cover the e7 escape square, which is important in some variations. So king g8 now played. By the way, if you step to the h file, either one of these squares, well, now you're just mating like this and this and this. So coming back here, queen g8, but now we see queen f6. It gets called a miss actually because now it's mate in 4. If you do this, it's now mate on the next move, whatever black does, because you're threatening mate here and mate with the knight hopping to e7. But okay, this one played, still forced resignation. Why? Well, what do you do? How do you stop the mate? You can't. You're threatening to mate here. And if the king runs away, well, now you can simply check and mate like this. The knight I mentioned is covering that critical escape square, kind of like an Anastasia's mate with the rook and knight. But, you know, the knight's so good at that, boxing the king in at times. Anyways, Alireza goes down. What a result for Dmitrij. Well played by him. If you enjoyed this one, do subscribe to never miss a future video. And to see another amazing, epic game, check out the video on screen. Thanks very much for watching and see you soon.